I picked the topic.
Yeah, I've had various thoughts about it. It's definitely been something that's come up before. I mean, as a speculative fiction writer, that it comes up very often, um, just in plotting a book, because it's such a worn out trope, and it's such a dangerous one to approach, because if you do it the wrong way, it can just kill all the tension in your novel. But if you play it right, it can be one of the best things.
Yeah. What is resurrection to you in terms of speculative fiction? What does it mean?
I mean,
It's a loaded question, isn't it? It could be a lot of different things. The list could be
yeah,
varied and long, right? I'm looking at TV tropes. You type in resurrection, you find it. It's a list. It's like 25, 50 options that
yeah.
show up in fiction.
Tropes is like a black hole of death and destruction and awesomeness.
No, I love it.
Yeah, I mean,
So
I
what
think
is it? What is it to you when you think of resurrection fiction? I mean, is it a game component? You know, your character pops back up and you can continue playing, or is it something else?
I mean, I think there's, when you're looking at fiction, it's a very broad definition, because you kind of see two main ways it shows up. One is either the character um, actually dies, is killed, and then is brought back to life by various means, whether it's magic or some form of science. And
What
then,
happened to Harry Potter? What was the deal with Harry Potter? Did we talk about this last time we were on together, or not? He dies, right?
yeah.
Like, spoiler.
I think
He's been out for like 14
that.
years, so
Yeah.
he dies, right? And then he decides to come back, or he's resurrected. What happens to Harry Potter? Do you remember?
I
Did you read the
think
books?
yeah,
I just
I read
assumed you
through them
did.
once when I was like a teenager, and I've seen the movie multiple times. I think, there's a few different ways you can translate it, and it's not very clear, but I think what the intention of it is that because he was the master of death, and the idea of the brain fart, the three objects that kind of overcome death, the wand and the stone, the philosopher's stone, and
Interesting.
the cape. Because he was the master of death, he had the ability to choose not to die. So because he was in possession of all three of those objects, when he died, he was able to choose to overcome death. So I think
Can he do it multiple times, or is it just a one time?
well, we do kind of see, and I think it's not as clear maybe in the books, if I remember correctly, but we do kind of see him choosing not to take that route, to give up that power over death, because he believes it's too much of a power, and he does that by breaking the Elder Wand, and throwing it away. So I think it's kind of left unclear whether or not he would have the ability to command death continuously, but it's kind of this choice that he makes to not continue in that role, to remain human, and not take that much power.
Would you want the choice over life or death for yourself? Only for you.
No.
You only have it for yourself.
No, I think, as a Christian, and as a Reformed Christian, my belief is that God is sovereign, and that to live is Christ and to die is gain. So even though the idea of death is terrifying, and my mom is battling cancer at the moment, and that's
wow.
I lost my father in a lot of cancer as well. The idea of facing those things, getting older in life, and knowing that eventually, my parents are going to pass, and my husband's in a not biker gang, he's in a motorcycle club. But like, he was just telling me today that he was at a bar, and they left, and 15 minutes later it was shot up. And so there's, the fear of, death isn't something we can control. It's something we just have to recognize that it's going to happen. I've had to walk through, the little girl I nanny. She's 4 years old, and her grandmother passed away recently, and had to walk her through the concept that her Nana is not coming back.
Yeah.
And I think, no matter what you believe, you're going to have to face that eventually. But that is, I think there's a very interesting perspective in the Silmarillion, where the God character creates the race of man after he's created elves, and he gives them the gift of old age and death. And the elves are extremely jealous of men being able to grow old and die. It is something that they view as a gift, and as something that they're being left out of. And I think that as much as death is something that it's I think the fear in it is valid. You can't say, oh, well, death isn't anything to fear. The only thing is fear itself. And, we can say all those things. They're platitudes. It's a valid fear. And I think to deny anyone that is a cruel thing. You need to allow people to work through that on their own. But I think to remove death from the equation, not only would we be in huge crisis if the planet just continued growing with more people who never died. But
if my throat was better, I'd articulate a way that would work, because it would go beyond the solar system, right? Because we could just continue on. But that would be painful if we all just stuck around on this planet. The tech that we have currently, we couldn't do it.
Yeah. And there's I think it's a very interesting thing to think about. I think that's a good point in science fiction and fantasy. But I think
people talk about curing death, right? They do it all the time now. They say that's possible. They're unlocking keys to what Alzheimer's is, and cancer, and things that knock people out. I mean, right now, you're going to have to go through a battle or whatever, but in 20 years, maybe not. Polio, back in the 50s was a life ender. Now it's not. You get immune to it. You get a shot, you're good to go the rest of your life. You're never going to have to worry about it. Maybe cancer is the same way. I mean, slowly you start removing these things that are detrimental to living, and then you just continue living, right?
Yeah,
Violence is one of the only ways to really guarantee to die. I mean, you can break the human and he doesn't live anymore.
Yeah, I think there's definitely theories in how it could happen and how it could change. I think there's a very interesting biblical theory, a biblical stance on that. In I believe it's in Genesis. God sees the evil that men perpetrate as they grow older and they grow wiser and they gain more power. And he says, okay, your years are going to be 500. You're not going to live past there. Because the heart of man is evil, and the more power we get, we don't tend to overcome those evils. We tend
to relinquish it. Right? The more power we have, the harder we grab onto it. I mean, God, we see that nowadays. Why does a billionaire want to be a billionaire? Because he was a millionaire. I mean, it's easy. Why does he want to be a trillionaire? Because he was a billionaire. I mean, it just never stops. There's never a satisfying moment where that's the last dollar I want to make, or that's the last day I want to live. It's kind of the same thing, right? Hoarding existence.
Yep. Yeah. And, you can, I think it's a very interesting as a science fiction writer, as a child, one of my favorite series was this book called The Mars Diaries. And it followed a young man who was in the kind of first colonization of Mars, and he had a chip implanted in his spine when he was young that kind of severed his nerve, so he couldn't walk anymore. But that allowed him to connect to a robot. This is actually one of the inspirations behind Malfunction, to connect to a robot and use the robot as his body. So it allowed him to do things in the Mars atmosphere that other people couldn't. But one of the major themes in the series was how technology is a double-edged sword. And so we look at things like, if we had the power to overcome Alzheimer's, we would have unlocked memory. So if you unlock memory, yes, we can use it to cure Alzheimer's and to cure dementia, but you've also unlocked this huge portion of the brain. We could also use it for spying for other horrible means. So there's definitely this side in which, you know, almost anything that can be used for good can be used for evil. I was just talking in the live stream I did on YouTube right before this, talking about cyberpunk, and talking about how, you know, or biopunk specifically, talking about how the same technology that we can use to cure genetic diseases affects not only that person who we change their genetics, but it affects their children and their children's children. So if you make a mistake, you don't even know it until it has affected the rest of their life, and then it's affected their children and their children's children, and you could pass on, you could destroy the human race, you know? So
yeah, that's true. I mean, if we get so homogenized that we're, you know, one something, I mean, we can basically kill ourselves off very easily with disease.
Yeah.
We have to maintain genetic diversity to have these strong disease fighting bodies.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like death is almost this safeguard. And like, yes, we can pass on amazing knowledge through books and through the internet. And I don't think that's a negative thing, a bad thing at all. However, to be able to restrain people before they gain so much knowledge and so much advancement, that starts to be used in an evil way, that their flaws affect that technology to the point that it's no longer useful, because we all have flaws. Even if you have a good motive behind that, we all have flaws. Yeah. And that flaw will be passed down to our creativity. And just like when I write books, you can see, you know, some of my most negative traits are going to come out, and my characters are going to come out in my world. And just like that, what we create is going to have our flaws in it. And I think that to be able to have death as kind of the stopper of saying, okay, you've had your turn, give it to someone new who has new ideas, who has different flaws, who can compensate for what you lack. I think, you know, death is a positive in that sense,
because it stops things.
Yeah.
It allows other people to take up the cause and do a different job.
Yeah.
But in terms of fiction, you're going to use resurrection to bring a character back to continue what they were already doing.
Yeah.
You write genetic gene splicing type fiction, right?
Yeah. Biopunk,
would you consider that a type of resurrection?
I think it definitely could be used as such. You know, clones are popular in biopunk, a popular trope, and it's not something that I've used excessively before. But it's a very interesting concept. You know, is a clone an actual resurrection of a person, or is it someone new? I think the Sixth Day, I believe it is.
What'd you say?
Clones are clones.
No. Are they the same, or are they?
Oh, what do I believe? Because I believe in a human soul and that the soul is created by God, I don't believe that a human being can create a soul. So I believe that there would be a different soul in a clone than there would be in the original. So, and that's not to say that that clone wouldn't be a person. I think there's also that question brought up. But, you know, if God can provide a soul to someone born naturally, he can provide a soul to someone born in an unnatural way as well. But I think that the soul is what makes us
you define person. Soul, right? What's soul? Consciousness. The ability to define what you are, retain something, want something, develop into something different and more, become less than what you could be because of choices that you make, stupid decisions or whatever. I mean, the consciousness is soul. So, I mean, a dog can have a soul, right, or consciousness. I mean, the resurrection, the clone, actually, I mean, going back into that.
Yeah.
They would be different completely from the moment they're born on. Can you clone in memories? Can you clone in that consciousness or that soul? Because what is it, right? If you go online, you try to find out what consciousness is. It doesn't pop up. It's not clearly identifiable. You know, you could dig down and you could say, it's an atom. It's the atoms in your bones and your thing. You are this collection of memories that just never goes away. Or you're an octopus surrounded by a meat suit or whatnot. right? I mean, God, it's like crazy. What are you? What are you resurrected? Are
and
you different? I mean, you're going to be different because no matter what, that clone is going to go on its own path. You're going to be disconnected from that. You're not going to have any memories of it, whether he has memories of anything you've done in your life or not.
Exactly. Yeah, it is. And it gets really complex. We don't have a good understanding of what consciousness is, and whether consciousness is the same thing as a soul or something different. There's kind of the two veins of thought, one being the entirely materialistic, the entirely, we don't have a soul. Consciousness is just nerves and neurons firing off in our brain. In which case, there would be no difference between a clone and the original, because you can clone those same neurons.
It doesn't matter, does it? It doesn't matter because the clone's never going to ask, hey, are you thinking differently than me? In that instance, it's just a natural reaction like a volcanic eruption, right?
Exactly.
Or a tree growing or something along those lines.
Yeah.
So there's not going to be any point for the clone to wonder.
Exactly. And this would also allow for the idea that you can download a human brain into a computer, which is one of the things that transhumanists are really fighting for, is to be able to download yourself into a computer so we can live forever and yet not require resources other than, a working computer. Ultron.
Ultron, or what was that Johnny Depp movie that came out maybe a decade ago?
Just watched that and I really enjoyed it. I
know right?
A lot of people said it was horrible, and I watched it. I was telling my friend there was something missing. I'm not entirely sure what it was that kept it from being a great movie, but it had some really great questions in there.
Well, they delved into a horror film at one point, right? They tried to capture this thing. They tried to stop it. And it's like, you think about it.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, you think about it for a second, it's just zeros and ones. How are you going to stop? That was my story, right? That you read. The idea of this thing, how could you stop something that just automatically is the thing that it inhabits? It becomes this computer and all computers because they're all networked together.
Yeah.
You can't stop it. You can't pull it out because it's sentient and it's doing whatever it wants. Yep. I mean, maybe I didn't articulate it as best I probably could, but that was the idea. I think that's what they did. They limited this thing. It didn't make any sense that they could be able to limit it and say, okay, now we killed it and we saved the world. No, you didn't, right? There's a billion of those things now. There's trillions of it. It can just duplicate itself over and over and over again.
Yep.
And if it's smart, it can hide itself into the tiniest little file in the dirtiest place that you'll never look and you'll never find it. Yeah. It doesn't take much, right?
Yeah. And these days we're discovering technology to be able to download computer programs into DNA. So essentially you can just go right back. You can create a body and download that consciousness back into a body, which I believe it was, I can't remember his name. He was the same guy who did like Serenity and the first Avengers movie, I believe. He did something.
Oh yeah. What's his name?
Remember, the Dollhouse, I believe it was called.
Yeah, no, I picture him. He's supposedly a scumbag, but he didn't weather Me Too very well for sexual harassment things. And I think he's Felicia Day's, the father of Felicia Day's kid. Or a lot of people do, actually. Yeah, I don't know. What the hell is his name, though? I can't remember what it is. It doesn't matter. He did Buffy the Vampire Slayer, too.
Yep. He has a very, very specific taste. All of his shows have a very specific feel to them. But it was a very, very interesting concept of being able to overwrite someone's brain with another person's consciousness. So
Joss Whedon.
There you go. They were taking these people and saying, okay, for so many years, you'll donate your body to this cause, and then at the end of that, we'll give you a huge check and you can go on with your life. And basically what they would do is they would wipe their brain and create these kind of zombies, and then when there was a mission, they would overwrite their brain with whatever. It could be, for use of, pleasure, or it could be for, one time she was a nanny, or one time she was, a spy or whatever. But it created this dystopia in the end where people were taking over other people's bodies to live forever. I think if if you want to look at the human consciousness as only synapses firing, all those things are possibilities, which is terrifying. However, I take the other viewpoint in which there is something that we cannot see or quantify or replicate, and that is a human soul, and that is given by God, and it's different and unique for each person.
Well, you, right? I mean, individuality, you are never, ever, ever going to be duplicated again within
there are
trillion
some
years.
people. Yeah, there are some people.
I mean, the math is there.
In what's it called? Why is my brain so dead tonight? To be able to die and come back in another form over and over and over again.
Oh, reincarnation.
Thank you. Yes. I'm just going to use you as my brain tonight.
That's okay.
Yeah, there are people who, of course, believe in reincarnation. And that's the same idea of the soul. So it's not that it precludes the idea of replication. It just looks very different, I think, than the more scientific, the more materialistic version, where it's...
What's interesting, though, if you think about resurrection in terms of, your Jesus story, in terms of him dying and then choosing to come back 3 days later.
Yeah.
Right? For what reason?
Well, specifically in the Christian faith, Christ didn't choose to come back in the sense that he didn't resurrect himself. That was the power of God, which is kind of confusing if you want to try and talk about the Trinity. It's complicated. But God the Father brought him back after 3 days. But the idea is that, and biblically the Bible says, Paul says, if there was no resurrection, we are of all the most to be pitied, because the Christian faith rests on the resurrection. Christ took on our sins onto him when he died. And so he put to death our sins. Those sins are no longer living. They no longer exist. And that was a punishment for the sin. And we know the punishment has been paid because he resurrected, that he defeated those sins. He defeated death. And because he is resurrected, we know that it's finished, that the transaction has been made. So that's kind of the concept behind why he resurrected. And, of course, in the Christian belief, he's still alive and will never die again. That's
oh, really? I thought he did die or something. Didn't he die after I don't know, never died, huh?
No.
Interesting.
He's sitting at the right hand of God. So he went up to heaven in physical form. It might be what you're thinking.
I don't know. I don't know anything about Jesus beyond the resurrection, right?
Yeah.
It gets a little muddled at that point. I mean, it becomes about the apostles at that point. It starts becoming about Peter and his rock, and Paul and his lion. I don't know the stories right now, but you know what I mean? It stops becoming about him and about these people who took that message and bravely gave it to the world. It stops being about the person whose message it was, I think.
Well, I mean, if we're going to look at it as a story only, we're always looking at it from the perspectives of the apostles. We have Matthew and John, who were actual apostles. We have Luke, who is a physician to one of the apostles, and we have Matthew was the physician, and then Mark and Luke were disciples of apostles. So they were sitting under
the next generation.
Yes. So they were writing down the story from the apostles. So we're always given the perspective of the apostles. And of course, in the Christian faith, the gospel is central. We never move away from the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. Everything comes back to that, because if that is not true, if that is not the center of faith, then nothing else matters. Like, why be a good person if there's no heaven, if there's no resurrection, if there's why even bother? It's Yeah, I don't know. It's very complex theology, and I'm probably not putting it correctly. But so the rest of the Bible isn't necessarily about the it story-wise it's about the apostles. However, all of it still goes back to the gospel. They're always preaching the gospel. They're always, and then the later we have Acts, which is the story, and then the rest of them are epistles, which are letters from, most of them from Paul, but from other apostles as well. They're letters to various churches.
What's the Reformed Church? Do you just deal with the Bible, or do you go outside of that?
Yeah, no, the Reformed Church. So it kind of goes back to we had the Catholic faith, which grew a lot in power in the kind of medieval era, and they became more political than they were a faith. It was a political power. So then we had the reformers come in and say, we need to get back to the roots. You need to quit taking money from people. You need to quit putting people in power who aren't even Christians. We need to quit killing people who aren't of the Christian faith, although there are some people, some of the reformers who were still quite murderous. The Reformation is a very interesting period.
Yeah.
But the basic
So,
idea.
what do you think of? Do you think Moses was resurrected?
Moses was. I'm sorry. Say that again.
Do you think Moses was resurrected?
No. There are some. I know the Catholic Bible has some additional books that we don't
know.
accept.
I just read that. I had no clue. What's the deal with Moses being resurrected?
I know that there's also the Coptic Gospels. I actually have a copy of those, though I've never really gotten around to reading them. Various the Gnostic Gospels, various faiths
that's the old school Christian religion. That's the guys who were blending in the pagan stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different trends around that time, a lot of different people who are, and there's actually a lot of people would say that's where the Muslim faith came from as well. Is kind of the rumors of that kind of trickle down. So that, it kind of depends on who you ask, historically speaking.
Oh, that's so interesting. So it was an attempt to Christianize them, and instead they warped their original religion into something like what we're seeing today.
Yeah, it was. So the original belief systems in that area were. Sorry, 1 minute. Just put it in the fridge. I'll take care of it. Thank you, baby. Sorry, my husband came in. Right. Okay. From what I understand, and I could definitely be wrong, the original faiths in that area, there was a lot of sects, there was a lot of tribes, and they believed they were polytheistic. They had multiple gods. So Muhammad heard the kind of trickle down of Christianity, of a single God, of all that, and he kind of began to form his own. Of course, if you read the Quran, their belief is that God or Allah directly inspired him. So that's the way they would say, is that he was inspired directly from Allah in, I believe it was in a cave. Allah sent him an angel of a sort. But from what we understand historically, he kind of heard the beginnings of the Jewish faith and the beginnings of the Christian faith, and he began to pull out, different prophets in order to gain political power. And then at some point, he actually became a warlord, and began kind of bringing all these tribes together under his control and under his rulership. And actually that area became quite advanced technologically under all that, and that was up until the Khans came through and just destroyed them. But yeah, I mean, there's a few different ideas of how that happened, but that's what I heard.
Muhammad, right, was resurrected, wasn't it?
I'm not entirely sure about that. I would have to go back and look. Like canonically, according to the Quran, I don't believe he was resurrected, but I think there's I don't think he is going to be either. I think that's because they also deny the resurrection of Christ. They believe that Christ was not resurrected.
That's strange. I mean, then you have, God, who was the guy who died that Jesus brought back?
Lazarus.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, you do have this kind of recurring theme of death not mattering, which is ultimately what religion is trying to do, right? Is cotton swab the idea of the ultimate demise, this painful moment that everybody watches a family member go through.
Yeah.
And knowing that they can't do anything about it and nothing's going to stop that person from disappearing completely.
Yeah.
This fantasy of resurrection, this fantasy fiction, speculative fiction, if we get into that part of the conversation, comes from this religious aspect, right? Of death not mattering, of taking the sting away.
Yeah, I think
giving you heaven, giving you something to hope for, giving you reincarnation. I mean, these are all, like you said, resurrections, because when you die and you go to heaven, you're resurrected. Jesus came back resurrected. Moses, blah, Muhammad, blah. You know what I mean? They're all coming back resurrected, which takes the sting out. In a story, you're taking the sting out, right? I mean, you give your characters extra life, basically. Make them live a little bit longer, make them live a little better.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's definite, I think in the highest form, when it's done correctly, all those themes are there and explored. And I think this is actually something that I love so much about the horror genre, is that they approach death.
Zombies reincarnation.
Well, specifically ghost stories, is that we approach death without taking away its sting, without taking away the fear of it, and the while validating all those things, like saying, yes, death is terrifying, death is sorrowful, death is horrifying. And of course, depending on the writer, we can approach those things and not take away those truths that, this is something horrible that we all have to face as human beings, and we have to be aware that this is going to happen to all of us. And your feelings surrounding it are valid, but let's approach the mouth of the beast and see what we can see. And I think specifically in ghost stories, it takes us right there and through that to the other side, and we can explore both death's effect on the living and what death means to those who have already passed on. And it's done in various ways. But, I think that's one of my favorite shows in recent memory is, The Haunting of Hill House. I actually just recommended it to my pastor this morning. But that's exactly what it does.
The show they're doing right now, that's based on a movie, right? Like 20 years ago?
The Haunting of the Hill House?
Movie came out? Yeah.
It is based on a classical horror story, what some believe is one of the first modern ghost stories. I actually got the book for Christmas, and I'm really, really excited to read it. When I say it's based on it, it's one of those things that's in name only. Apparently, they changed it so much.
They modernized the crap out of it, didn't they?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the original is about, a group of people coming together at a haunted house that one of them inherited, Scooby-Doo-esque. Obviously, they don't take the Scooby-Doo route, but, just the classical strangers meet at a haunted house. Whereas The Haunting of Hill House is about a family and about parenthood and about the fear of allowing your child to face the world and knowing that the world is a terrifying place and knowing that they will die and facing death as a family.
The Haunting of Hill House was written by Shirley Jackson. She did The Lottery too.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite short stories.
Yeah, apparently.
But yeah, you're saying when you talk about a haunting, you talk about a ghost. When you write about a ghost, you go write about somebody who dies having something more to do. So they come back and they haunt until they satisfy their goal or mission or whatever the hell it is.
Yeah.
It's kind of, they are actually physically interacting with our world to make something happen, even though they're no longer here.
Yeah.
I die today. All of my fiction stops, collects dust, probably nobody cares. You know what I mean? But maybe I come back and I haunt my son until he sits down in my desk chair and writes my fiction for me. I mean, that's kind of a resurrection. I'm going to continue living.
Yeah, it is. You have all the benefits of resurrection without the diffusing the tension, which I think is great, because especially fantasy and superhero genres are very well known for this, where, you kill your character and then magic brings them back, or they, you say a spell and they come back, and then next time they get killed, you can bring them back again and nobody actually dies. And, superhero, I mean, forget about it. We all know how that works. But you kind of lose your fear of death. Like, for instance, and I know there's people who are definitely going to disagree with me, but this last Avengers movie, like, I was not at all emotionally affected at the end with the characters. I'm like, okay, we already know who's signed up for the next one. I can probably count on my fingers who might possibly actually stay dead.
Well, that's not fair, because I know you watched it on Netflix months and months and months after the movie came out.
I watched that one in theaters.
Did you? You didn't know then. You didn't know Spider-Man was coming back. Yeah, you did. You knew he was getting a second film. And it was so lame, his stupid little, Tony, I'm so scared. No, you're not. Just fade away. Be a superhero. That wasn't very superhero-like, in my opinion. I was annoyed by that. I didn't like that at all.
People were really affected by that part. I was just like,
nope. Okay. I was annoyed. I was really pissed off. I was like, that was probably the worst moment in the movie for me. It's like, no. Yeah. Oh, God, that was horrible.
I mean, when you look at that, and I think there's a little bit more fear associated with this next one, because we have a few people and that's the big deal, because people's what's it called? Treaty, not my brain.
Well, let me ask you this. We're talking about what'd you say?
I was going to say people might actually die. I think Captain America and Iron Man are not going to be
die, and not ever going to die. I mean, they've got thousands of comic books that say they're never going to die. You know what I mean? It's like you go to a comic book film because you know they're not going to die. Maybe that takes the sting out of death too. It's like video games, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you die over and over again. You don't really die. I mean, it's dumb use of the word, dumb use of the verb, right? I mean, you're not really actually dying. You're just returning to a part that you saved that or whatever.
Yeah. And I actually used that in Malfunction to really explain why, because my characters, the cyborgs, can be controlled by people through virtual reality. And most of the people who are controlling them in the major battles think that it's a video game. And there's, I'm just thinking about being a kid and playing a character in a video game, like jumping off of a cliff to see how far I can get, or, what cool moves I can do on the way down. And just imagining the kind of reaction in if that was a real human being. I don't know. It was a very interesting concept to me, because in video games, death becomes it's just a joke. It's laughable,
And then we know it's not, right? I mean, in the real world, we know death is very, very scary. And for real, I mean, I like the idea of a resurrection. You pull this person back from their afterlife, the feet of their gods, whatever, they're in paradise. You rip them out of it, and you throw them back into their body in the middle of this horrendous battle where everybody's fighting for their lives already, right? And they just lost their battle's over with. But they're forced back into this broken vessel and told to get up, keep fighting. And if you die again, I'm just going to resurrect you again. But he keeps going to heaven or paradise or whatever. How torturous would that be? Near-death experiences are an amazing thing that I kind of listen to impulsively. I mean, I love them.
Yeah.
The idea that people have an idea of what happens after death and come back changed. You know what I mean? Supposedly, I don't know.
Yeah.
But supposedly they're different. They think differently. They feel differently. They act differently. And why? Because their chemical were changed in their brain when they almost died. Or did they see something that you only see when you die?
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, people have discussed this for generations, and we probably will never know.
But do they? I don't know. Have we discussed near-death experiences for generations?
Oh, yeah.
Or have we? Have we?
I think, I mean, if you look.
See, because if you think about it on the surface, yeah, we had to have had those experiences as human beings going back the 2 million years that we've been an actual species or whatnot. Well, whatever your opinion is. But, you know, we've had to have had those experiences, and you don't find them kind of being regurgitated in oral traditions necessarily as I died and came back. You know what I mean? People aren't talking about that as an experience that happened to them until you reach the 20th century, right? Or maybe even, I don't know, when does it start? Do you know?
I mean, I think it looks a little bit different in the modern age because we have medicine that allows people to come back closer and closer to that brink as we see it.
You have an accident, I put you in a coma. You're basically virtually dead. I fix what's wrong with your body. I pull you out of the coma. You're not dead anymore.
Yeah.
If I don't put you in the coma, you die. You know what I mean?
They are attempting, either this year or next year, they're attempting the first head transplant.
I think, did I read about that? It might actually have happened already. Have they? Let's find out.
I would say it was this year, which is just, I mean, it's going to sound a little bit ironic me saying it, a little bit mind-boggling, the idea that they're, I mean, yeah, I don't have big expectations, but I was watching.
That was 2017. It was a success. They did it.
Really?
They fixed this guy. And he's still, well, I don't know if he's still alive.
Huh. I'm going to have to research that. I wonder what I was watching from when then, because I thought that was from here.
What I'm reading. Is this bullshit? I don't even know. I have no clue why human head transplants will never work. That's November 20th, 2017. September 20th, 2016, on Good Morning Britain, world's first head transplant recipient wants a better life. So, is that like future tense?
So that's, I think like, because he was, I believe he's, I want to say he's paralyzed from the neck down, and you know, he's willingly going into this, knowing that he could possibly die. Now, I'm not entirely sure if I remember all the circumstances surrounding it, so I don't want to try and speak with any authority. But it was a very, like, the documentary I was watching was explaining less of the emotional side, more of the scientific side of it, like how they were going to do it. It was very, very interesting. So, you know, we have these pretty extreme situations of people, you know, as we view it, coming back from death.
People are putting the blood of teenagers into their bodies to rejuvenate their systems.
Stem cells.
Stem cells is another thing that works very well, repairing damage. Mel Gibson's father, I guess, was about to die. He was like 89, 90 something years old. He didn't have much time, and they brought him into a clinic and they did stem cells, and the dude's like 99 years old and doing Ironman triathlons. So that's bullshit. I mean, it's completely made up, but you are looking at a world in which you can decide whether or not you want to die.
Yeah.
You want to eat bags of Cheetos and McDonald's and smoke cigarettes? Well, you're pretty much dooming yourself to die. You want to micromanage your diet. You want to exercise to the right exact amount so that your body isn't too stressed, but yet you can still function on a very strong level. You're going to live a long time, right? As long as you're not in a car accident or have...
Theory.
What?
In theory.
Yeah, in theory. I mean, you never know, because the healthiest people die of cancer all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Or die of an embolism.
Matt Chandler is a pastor, well-known pastor, who's actually the head of the church organization that my church is part of. And he was, you know, relatively young, very, very, very healthy. He says he was in the best shape of his life. I believe he had 3 children at the time. He was told he would not live out the year because of a brain tumor. And of course, he's alive and well right now. When I say, of course, that's probably...
Which is interesting, right? Because if he had not taken care of himself, if he wasn't strong going into the surgeries and the chemotherapy, he would have died. I mean, it's not science. I mean, it's science, obviously, but it's not hard science. I mean, it's easy to say, I'm going to live right, but you're still going to die.
Yeah.
Jack Filet, whatever his name was, that dude, he pulled buses with his teeth.
Yeah.
His little tracksuits, you probably know who I'm talking about. He died not too long ago. He was like 93. I mean, he didn't live outrageously a long life.
Yeah.
He was like the healthiest man ever, supposedly. I mean, it was all marketing. And then the oldest person's 125 years old.
Yeah. And that's we are seeing an increase in people's ages, which kind of brings up a lot of questions in these kind of back to nature approaches to health. But like if we look in past generations, it's not like that line, at least in their opinion, it's not like that line was any less blurred. Like if we look at the story of, I believe it's Mercy Brown, who started the vampire mania here in America, the idea of vampires were, these people looked dead, like to all conventional means, to the best medicine of that day. They were dead, they were buried, and some of them were still alive. We have proof, we have coffins with, scratch marks on the inside of them, and when these people wake up later. And so there are, I mean, now when we look back at it, we're like, okay, well, we could tell medically these days that they were actually dead or not, but in their opinion, in those times, the best of medicine couldn't prove if you were actually dead. It was a real terror for people to be buried alive.
No, it's terrible for me too. Did you see Kill Bill 2?
No, I've never watched this. I'm not huge into Tarantino.
Oh, I love Tarantino. There's a scene where the bride gets buried and she has to dig herself out. But before she digs herself out, it's really intense.
Yeah.
Really intense scene. And there's another movie, I guess, with Ryan Reynolds. He gets buried alive. I've never seen it. I have no desire to. It's a fear. I have.
Yeah.
I probably will never be buried alive. Yet the idea of it is incredibly intimidating.
Yeah. My husband does not want to be cremated because he has this terrible fear that he will be trapped in his body and his soul won't leave, his consciousness will still be there, but his body will be dead, and they will cremate him and he will feel everything. I'm like, well, I would prefer a few hours of intense pain and have it over versus slowly rotting in the ground while worms eat my flesh. I think if we're going to choose the two, I'm going with the incineration.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's going to be a few hours. You're probably going to die immediately, right? Within a minute or two. It's really hot. It's like 2,000, 3,000 degrees.
Yeah, well,
they just do it over and over again.
Talking about going in there alive. His fear is that his consciousness won't die, just his body.
Yeah. And we don't know, do we? No, we don't know. We don't have any idea what happens. We don't know if consciousness, stains atoms, and every single atom has a piece of you in it. And maybe you will burn alive, but then atoms really don't burn. I mean, you can't destroy them. You can split them with a lot of whatever physics ability, but you really can't destroy them, can you? They become something else. Yeah. So, I mean, you don't ever actually die. When the Earth goes into the sun, you just become the sun again. When the sun goes supernova, you'll be spread out into the universe. I mean, you just never die. You will live forever. Your consciousness, though, unfortunately, and they call it ego death, don't they? They call it ego death when you stop being the thing that you are.
Yeah. Yep.
When does that happen?
It's very complex and yet so simple.
Yeah, because you got to live for the moment because it doesn't matter. I mean, nobody's pulling you back. They might collapse right now. I have a heart attack, however that feels. They might resurrect me with paddles. Yeah. Man, how does the rest of your life work? Yeah. You touch death like that. Even if you don't have a near-death experience, even if you don't have a moment where you see an afterlife, but just blackness and nothing, and then you wake up to a doctor saying, dude, you got to lose 50 pounds. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you live like that? I mean, how do you live? You got to you lose 50 pounds, but still, you touched it. It's there.
Yeah, it's coming. There is no escape. And I think it's something my father has talked about multiple times. Growing up overseas, death has a very different meaning over there than it does here. And I think there's a very different concept of the afterlife as well. Here in America, when people die or are going to die, we put them in hospice, we put them behind closed doors, we put them in hospitals, and then we have nice quiet burials in places where we try not to think about or see them. Over there, you don't name your child for the first 3 years because there's no guarantee that they're going to live. Women are married very young more often than not. And there is a very, very high rate of death for women giving birth. There is no accidental death. If you die, then it's, well, the poison man got you, or there was some evil spirit that got you. There was someone who cast a spell on you. There was some sort of witchcraft involved, because death is an everyday part of their life. They hire mourners, they hire people to cry, and to us that's horrifying, but to them it's to honor the dead, to hire people to fake cry at the funerals. So here in America we have a very different relationship with death, and I think as a result we have a much harder time processing it.
I don't know. I personally know there's nothing you can do, right? Yeah. I mean, I've lost people. Not my mom still alive, my dad's still alive, my siblings are still alive. Thank God my children are still healthy and here, and my wife and everybody's here. The important people haven't died. I can't imagine what that would feel like. But other people have, and it's been like kind of, what can you do?
Yeah, it's sobering. And that's, I think, getting into 30s for me, like facing the fact that the people around me are going to start dying. People close to me are going to be dying, where I haven't experienced that as much before these last few years. It's a very, I don't know, it's a sobering fact to go from, okay, my grandparents passed away and I love them very much and I cried for them. But they were advanced in age, and it's not wrong or horrifying versus Sandy Hook.
Yeah. Or this New Zealand thing.
Yeah.
I mean, the things that are happening, the people who don't expect it, you think about it all the time and it could happen to you, but
yeah,
it's as likely as being struck 5 times by lightning on the same day or something. I mean, this is never going to happen to you. It's never going to happen. And ultimately, you're probably not going to die because you're a little bit behind. You know what I mean? As you're dying, you're probably not going to realize you're dying until you're already dead, and then it's too late anyway. Yeah. You're already dead.
At least that's the hope for most of us.
Right. I mean, this is the way the human brain just works a little bit slower than reality. I mean, have you ever been injured? I mean, it's really tough to realize that you're injured. It's like, oh shit, I'm not working. My body's not functioning the right way.
Yeah.
What's going on?
Well, I mean, it's been interesting, since my mom was diagnosed. It's been interesting facing the world now from that perspective, because on the one hand, it's still distant enough because it's not me. It's someone that I love and that I care for deeply, and at times that I wished it was me rather than her. But it's not me. I'm not facing that prospect.
But it will be you one day, right? I mean, you got to look at your mom's experience and just kind of hope that, I mean, how do you do it? Yeah, the resurrection for you at the end of the day, if you think about resurrection in terms of your life, because she gave it to you, you are the resurrection of your mother.
Yeah.
And the honorable thing would be to present her with a very comfortable death if it came to that. But that's not the point of cancer, is it? The point of cancer is to fight it and get better or whatnot. You said cancer, right?
Yeah. And it's been interesting as a mindset. Changing my body is no longer this friendly thing that allows me to climb trees and swim in the ocean and run around unhampered that it was as a child. My body is now the enemy.
It always was, though.
It always was.
It always was.
Shift. And I think, I mean, we've spent most of this time talking about death rather than resurrection, but I think that's
was hand in hand, right?
Yeah, you can't have one without the other. And there, I think that
resurrection is what happens after death. I mean, resurrection is Shakespeare. I come over, I stupidly have a book of sonnets on my desk open to the first sonnet because I've done nothing more than read that one. But I mean, is that a resurrection? Is he resurrected every time I read his words? I don't know. Because you can do that, can't you? And then that way, everybody from the Gutenberg press on can live forever. Yeah. But before that, it's not even a human being anymore. And that's what's fascinating. There's been so many people that have lived and they've all died.
Yeah.
And none of them have been resurrected except for certain people in magic books or whatever. You know what I mean? It's not for us to know because other people wrote it down and that was translated 500 or 600 times. And then we get a book that says something different or something completely. I mean, there are so many Lazarus and Muhammad's cousin. And I mean, people die and come back all the time in that book in all three versions. Yeah. And in other stories too. My WoW character got resurrected hundreds of times, thousands of times, millions of times.
Yeah. I think there's two ways. Saying there's two ways. Everything has two ways. I dichotomize. But I think there's in fiction when we're dealing with how plots and how stories deal with resurrection. There's this kind of simplified version, which is, Gandalf, where he was dead and he comes back to finish his job in the plot. And there's some deep thoughts in there, but for the most part, it's like, okay, we have something to accomplish, so let's get on with it.
But he doesn't die, though, necessarily, does he? I mean, he does dive into this battle with this hell demon and escape it more powerful than he went in, right?
He dies and is sent back, is how they explain it. So yeah, it's like an actual resurrection.
And he was always an angel, anyway. I'm part of the afterlife.
He was I guess that's probably the best kind of correlation. And it's hard to correlate because Tolkien, as much as the Silmarillion is kind of a retelling of the creation story in the beginning, as a Catholic would view it, it's not, and he didn't want it to be viewed that way. So it's hard to just be like, oh, he was an angel, because there's a lot of complexity to that of what exactly he was. But yeah,
I was going to argue with you. I was going to say Tolkien had to have been Anglican, but no, he was straight up a Catholic. Because I remember C.S. Lewis kind of bending in that way at one point.
Yep. Which is kind of funny because C.S. Lewis did believe in a at least at one point believed in the and bringing up stuff, I can't remember the words. Hell before heaven, the place between hell and heaven, where you
purgatory.
Yeah, you're functioning very well with my brain tonight.
I'm not even functioning. I'm barely functioning.
Well, it's a good thing I'm so talkative. I think so. If we're looking at fiction, there's the Tolkien-esque version where there's a plot, there's characters, and those characters serve that plot. And yes, they can have layers and depth, and this is probably what we're talking about, like plot driven. But then there's also, and I think Buffy probably is a good example of this, actually, when there's one part where she dies and where she doesn't really want to come back, and they do kind of talk about death a little bit more. But it's a book that brings back a character, but there's a conversation to be had around it, and I think it's done very effectively, more in like hard science fiction than it's done in fantasy or in like space opera. And that's like a vast generalization, but there is, I think, it's the story is used to explore death.
Well, I think also getting into it, you start to realize this term resurrection can fit a lot of motifs in fiction, right? You can have something resurrected that's not necessarily dead, ego dead, not dead, buried 6 feet under. You can have somebody resurrect from an attitude. I mean, you can have a resurrection occur that is different than the Jesus myth or whatnot. You know what I mean? You have something, you can have it not mean the guy comes back from his afterlife.
Yeah, exactly. It's a resurrection. It serves a certain function in fiction and has a certain, and it's not always to explore death. Like it could be a bad guy becomes a good guy, or it could be your friend no longer wants to be your friend and then comes back and then decides to be your friend again, or we're talking about
Something
ghosts.
like that, yeah, a resurrection of a relationship. I mean, what you have in fiction with resurrection is changing the tempo of the story, right? I mean, you're fixing something that's bad.
Yeah.
Dying and being dead is bad. Resurrection fixes that.
Yeah.
Makes it better.
Yeah. It's you're pushing.
If you didn't know what fixes it meant, I just had to.
Yeah. Is it you push your reader off the cliff and you let them experience those emotions and then you fix it.
Last minute, you let them sail away on their squirrel glider suit or whatever.
Yeah. Or you take the Stephen King method and they come back and kill everyone.
They're so broken into a million pieces. They pull themselves together, crawl up the mountain, stab you in the middle of the night. That's Stephen King.
Yeah.
Or
which I am working on.
Like a soldier in a battlefield, science fiction style, and he dies, and then immediately he's 3D printed, consciousness and all, and jump back into the battlefield with all the experiences of having died, all its training and the anger and angst of whatever that means, and right back into the fray to die over and over again if needs to, stepping on the parts and pieces of himself that flew off to continue killing. I mean, that's a horrible resurrection, right?
Yeah, it's not always a positive thing. Have you seen The Surrogates at all?
I don't think so. What is it?
It's a science fiction movie and one of those severely underrated, or it may just be my odd taste. Sometimes I like movies everyone else hates. But the basic concept is that they've created these basically human robots, except they don't have a conscience. So you can go into virtual reality and you can live your life through what they call these surrogates. And so you can look however you want to look. You can, change your face, change your body, change your hair.
Is Bruce Willis in this?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Was he in the movie? Yeah.
Yeah. And they play with that in some very interesting ways.
I thought I was annoyed. I was annoyed because I didn't understand why anybody would want to be a surrogate. It didn't make any sense that you would have this complex piece of machinery running out in the world and you were just carefree with it. You know what I mean? Like, who can afford that? That would be astronomical in terms of cost. I must be missing something. I don't think that's necessarily what annoyed me, but the movie didn't necessarily sit with me very well. Something was off. But yeah, it's a great example because you go out in this fake body and your fake body could die and you're still going to be okay.
Yeah.
What about The Matrix, where you die in your fake body and you die in the real world?
Yeah. But it does. I mean, it was an interesting thing to see, I think, in The Surrogates, to see Bruce Willis's character go from being able to be killed and just fix it to walking around in his real body, and death suddenly has meaning. It has impact. It's not this
very true. I remember that being a very powerful scene or two where you felt the vulnerability of the character. You felt he was soft and squishy.
Yeah.
And he was surrounded by these horrible, evil, mean, strong machines.
Yeah. And it's a very different idea of resurrection, of going from being a superhero, a god,
to being weak.
To being vulnerable. And I think, there's a lot of ways to play with that. I think science fiction does an incredible job of facing, and specifically cyberpunk, because that's cyberpunk and biopunk. And yeah, I think
what's it doing? What do you think it's doing when it does this? When it looks at death like this, what do you think fiction is doing? Is it trying to answer the question of what death is? Or is it using death as just a simple plot device? And that's it.
I think it depends on the author. I think that's what makes a resurrection flop, is when the author is just using it as a plot device, as they're just manipulating their reader and being like, I want to see you squirm. And I think that's when it doesn't hit home for the reader, when the reader feels and understands they're being manipulated and it doesn't impact. And of course, when it's overused as well. But I think that the difference is between when an author and a writer is exploring those themes for themselves, and inviting the reader to go along on the journey with them. And I've heard multiple people say that this is what J.K. Rowling was doing with Harry Potter. She was exploring death, and she was trying to. Now, I'm not going to speak as to that, because only the author can speak to her or his intentions. But I think there is a way that you can see there's a bigger impact when you as the reader can see the author bringing up questions and kind of turning it over in their mind and saying, I don't know the answer. What do you think?
You want the author to leave it up to you?
I think, okay, as an author, I dislike being preached to. As a reader, I dislike being preached to. As an author, I dislike planting my flag in the ground and saying, this is the way it is. Join me or die. I think that is and I hesitate to say this because I don't want to offend authors who do write in this way. And I think there's ways to write this way that you can be sensitive to your readers. But I feel like that is infantilizing readers. It's saying, come, dear reader, sit under my tutelage, and I will teach your poor, sweet child brain how the world works. I do have solid opinions on things. I do have themes that I intend to write to. But I think I always go back to when I was at camp, I was being taught what we called low ropes, which was group building exercises. And at the end of these games that we do to build the group, we would kind of have like a session where we'd sit down and we'd ask questions and then we'd talk. And one of the things we were taught is to never tell the group what they learned. Ask questions and let them come up with it, because a human brain is going to hold on to things that they had to think about and they had to come up with. Whereas if you just sit them down and, well, today we learned that we need to depend on our friends, they're going to be like, oh, that's good, and then forget about it by the time.
Yeah.
So I think that as an author, I can accomplish my goal of expressing my opinion better by asking questions, but also as an author, I'm not doing all the work and handing you a finished product. I am writing something and asking you to engage your emotions and your imagination and your intellect to meet me halfway. And I think that if I spoon feed it to the reader, it's just not going to be as good of a product.
Ultimately, that's the goal, right? I mean, you want to show versatility.
Yeah. And I think that's why I describe my brand as exploratory fiction. It's not like I'm going to sit down and give you guys a test and, test, do you know this? And do you know this? And do you know this? We're asking questions and exploring the answers together. We're not just, I talk too much as it is.
Well, I mean, this has been a great topic. I mean, we got death stuck for a second, which I think is fortunate because you can't talk about resurrection without death.
Yeah.
I mean, it just doesn't work. And resurrection doesn't work without life either. So, I mean, why do you want to be alive? Why? To avoid death. And that's the whole thing about resurrection.